Greetings. It's the last Thursday of March in this quarter. It's the 28th of 2024. Glad to have you on this edition of Content Evolution New World. Our featured guest today is actually a regular contributor to these calls as a participant, Tim Baharin. And I go a long ways back, not like going back to high school, but back to advisory council days at IBM. What do you think, Tim? Maybe 25, 30 years?
At least at this point, yeah.
Yeah, so at any rate, long time, and delighted to have you with us, and glad to have my co-host Mike McGuire on with us. Mike, how are you today?
Doing very well, thank you. How is everybody?
Great.
Great. How are you, Mike?
Looking forward to having
Doing
your
fine.
thoughts along with all of our other participants on the call today. So Tim, as I was saying before we turned the recording on, that managed to botch your acronym, right? From what you prompt is what you get to, to some other things, but we're delighted to have you with us. And what you wrote about NVIDIA, very interesting. Why don't you unpack it for us, and then we'll get into a discussion.
Last week, NVIDIA held their developer conference out here in San Jose. And it was truly amazing in the sense that, one, they had to actually take the San Jose Sharks tank, the hockey team's arena to handle the 10,000 attendees in the keynote. And there was kind of a joke because it was like the Taylor Swift concert of tech, but it was truly amazing to look at that actual arena being. I mean, there was standing room only to hear Jensen's keynote, and I'm sure by now you've read a lot about all of the new stuff that he's introduced, including Blackwell, the new, incredibly new chipset that's 4 times more powerful than the current H100. And as I listened to his keynote, which was, by the way, almost 2 hours, and he didn't lose anybody, which was more amazing. He very specifically reiterated a key point that he brought up in a interview about maybe 3 weeks earlier, about what is generally being referred to as no-code programming. And I don't know if you guys, I think Kevin sent out the actual article, so you may have been able to actually take a look at it. But I wrote this piece for Forbes that focused on his overall vision. And he actually came up with, he said another thing after the event in one of the analyst discussions that he really felt that within 5 years, AI would be doing the majority of all actual programming, and that users would then, or the programmers then would be customizing the content and maybe doing some of the corrections or things that they may want to add to it. But I wanted to have this as a part of a discussion because this is actually a pretty big deal. I don't know how many of you guys are programmers, but I know that, and I wrote about this in the article, that years ago, and I mean, this is like the 70s, I think it was, I was working for a company that had DEC PDPs, and they were short on programmers, so they started giving me instructions on how to do a particular program on the database. And I started to do some fundamental programming at that point, and I was terrible at it. Because I have an analytical mind, but not in the context of the way programming uses logic. And again, as not a trained programmer, I suppose if I had to put more time on it. But I reiterated there, and I started playing around with some things. And I'm sure you guys have all used some of the Midjourney or DALL-E or any other programs to do graphics. I started playing around with that, and I did a very simple graphic of my golden retriever chasing a squirrel, and it gave me the most amazing visual of that exact experience. And this idea of being able, and I use the term, again, I came up with this term, and it was more of a joke than it was, um, because Mike actually suggested the WYSIWYG connection. But it's basically what you prompt is what you get. And as you know, and in fact, what Jensen was saying, the CEO of NVIDIA, is that what we're going to end up with is having to train a whole generation of not coding engineers, but prompt engineers who will be able to give the kind of instructions to the AI, whatever engine they're using, to create the actual code. Now, I was not clear. I do not have the ability, at least the way the programs are set up now, to go back and look at the code that was used to create my golden retriever chasing the squirrel. But absolutely, it'll be a standard string code line, just as it would be written by hand. And the ramifications of this is pretty significant, especially the way it can do both not only standard text and stories and reports, but video and then animation. And then this week, some Hollywood producers, producers, were given early access to this specific version of Sora that allowed them to create a 3-minute video on Sora. And I don't know did any of you get a chance to take a look at that link from the producers? It's stunning. And you could see just with one industry alone how this could have a dramatic impact on Hollywood and some of the way that they're going to do some of their videos. And one of the major producers in Atlanta and directors, I can't remember his name right now.
Tyler Perry.
What was it?
Tyler Perry.
Tyler Perry, yeah. So he was he has a beautiful place down in Atlanta, and he was going to build the equivalent of 8 sound stages for actual producing and shooting videos down in his Atlanta compound. And after he saw Sora, he literally put the kibosh on the other. He had 2 already built, and he was going to build, I believe, 6 more or 4 more, whatever it was. But it stopped him dead in his tracks, because he said, if you could do some of this type of stuff with just AI, why am I going to expend, however much it was going to be, which was in the, tens of millions of dollars for new sound stages and, all these other type of things. Anyway, I wanted to bring that to the
reported as $1 billion investment that he basically said, nope, I'm not going to do. It was multi-year, but to the economy, it's kind of like Atlanta shuttered, right?
Yeah,
that he wasn't going to do this.
Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because all of you are in tech in some way and another. And again, I'm sure you're following not only NVIDIA and some of the others who are building these next generation processors, but the idea that a coder who is trained, in C++ and everything else over the last 20 years is now going to be given a whole new tool and way to work. And I was talking to some of the programmers that I know, and they're basically buckling down now to learn how to do not expand what they're doing in coding language, but instead learning how to create prompt language to create their whatever they're doing. So I wanted to throw that out to the group because all of you are, again, in tech in some form or another, and at least aware of it. And I'd just love to hear your guys' perspective as well.
So I'm going to tell you a story from your neighborhood Tim. Several years ago, I was on a roundtable at Institute for the Future, and I was seated next to the guy who was running AI for Google Cloud, and next to him was Roy P., who is one of the um, original founders of the AI group at Stanford University. And we're going to, as we got in deeper into conversations, Roy said, you know what? He said, when I joined Stanford and I was on the faculty, I was a professor in philosophy. And I kind of volunteered, to go into this new group, right, that, looked interesting, that we were looking at it in terms of, how do you look at cognition? How do you potentially, turn that into systems of cognition? That looked interesting, so I went over to that. When you think about, his background, he has an excellent background to be a prompt engineer, because what we look at right now, the guy that was from Google said, I'm telling my kids who are going to be ready for college, forget learning programming, because we'll be a peak programmer in 10 or 15 years. I think that curve has probably changed now. They need to study, they're interested in this stuff, they need to become system architects, right? Because system architecture will survive, programming won't. Because the systems will be able to program themselves. You have to tell them what to do, what you want to accomplish, but you won't have to actually know the language. And guess what? This is a retrieval of liberal arts. Is the more general domain knowledge you have, the better prompt engineer you're going to be, right? In fact, the term prompt engineer is probably a little bit off, because it's less engineering and more about general human knowledge that you have available to craft better questions. So I'll just stop there, right? And answering what you were asking about here, Tim, because that moment was pretty interesting in that room. Mike, what do you think?
Well, no, I found, Tim's article kind of recounting the keynote and this whole topic, as usual, to be, fascinating, Tim, and I really enjoyed that article and the one you did for Fast Company with the key 3 trends, where you kind of dove into the AI as being one of those key trends. And as I was reading through those the other day, it's interesting, Tim, I think you saw Markov's piece in the Times about the fact that Xerox PARC and SRI are now coming together. They're merging, which is, those were the kind of, to me, the kind of the east-west poles when I was coming up in tech, right? You either got somebody at PARC to look at your whatever newfangled thing you were working on, or somebody at SRI, if you were dependent on some form of technology that wasn't readily available at the time. And I think it'll be interesting to see, I think, Tim, where can that notion, right, of a kind of a multi-source of funding, but not necessarily venture funding, which is what I think PARC and Xerox were and will be, right? Is they work on pure research ideas, right, and topics. And I think, to me, that's where I wonder if you're seeing that an entity like that, where again it's not driven by quarterly or annual demands by investors, but rather pure research. Do you see that kind of an entity, or is this all going to be a private company, right? That is, private companies or public companies like NVIDIA that drive not just the core, but also kind of flattening out all those layers of programmers or chip architects that perhaps down the road won't be as important as they were for the last 60, 70 years. I'm just curious, what that entities like that as a combined PARC and SRI are going to have any influence, or have potential for some influence on that. Because if we think about the local economy here in the Bay Area, and in a lot of places, right, with where tech's kind of grown up, Boston, et cetera, that's a pretty substantial number of people, right, who are going to have to adapt or retire. I'm just curious how you see a kind of quasi private entity like these research entities, having any role in that future.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you guys have read the Markov article in the New York Times on this merger of Xerox and SRI. I actually have a little bit of a connection because my particular company, Creative Strategies,
Yep.
was actually a spin-off of SRI in 1969. And then I had the privilege of consulting to Xerox PARC for about 7 years. So I know both entities relatively well. And again, as you pointed out, their funding, of course, Xerox actually was funded by Xerox
Right.
specifically, but SRI were funded by dedicated projects that came in from, pretty much every region of the world.
Right.
But I think that the one thing, and I was thinking about this when I was reading the article from Markov, is that could you have even believed even 5 years ago that SRA and Xerox would get together? What would be the common denominator, right? And this whole shift to putting the burden of in somewhat the the back end. So it's all being done in AI and automatically and behind the scenes, as opposed to having to use physical programmers to write the code from scratch. What that does is a couple things. It does threaten a significant amount of engineers who are embedded in the traditional coding model because they're going to have to completely relearn how to what we would call code automation. But it also has a potential of changing the dynamics of what companies actually can do because it'll speed up the process as well. When I was, and I know Jensen pretty well, and I followed him and spent a lot of time with him over the years. He doesn't make these kinds of comments without an immense amount of forethought based on what he knows he's creating. And I think I pointed out in the Forbes article is that, in fact, it was I think it was in the last line, is that he's basically inventing the future. And in the keynote himself, he actually brings up multiple times where, he prompted, for example, Sam Altman at OpenAI to actually start building the next generation of these high-end systems. And he personally brought his first generation of the supercomputer. He delivered it directly to Sam in person 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that what you're seeing, especially with some of these guys in the AI, and especially Jensen and AMD and even Intel with Gelsinger, they're seeing the future and then creating the technology to make it. And then they're threading it in the context of not only just semiconductors, but hardware, software, and services. So you're seeing a whole new layer of technology being built right now that is going to revolutionize the whole concept of what technology can do just in the next 5 years, let alone the next 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, your son, Ben, is tracking some of the other upstarts that are, very specific chip, companies that are just trying to do architectures for machine learning and AI too. So they're the incumbents that you're talking about. And there's a whole bunch of other people that are not going to leave Jensen alone. I mean, Jim Spoor, who joins from time to time, is Jensen's neighbor. Has known him for a long time, like you have, but not in terms of being able to walk down the street and say hello. Yeah, I mean, this is I forgot who said it, that it's better to invent the future than it is to predict it, right? That's the best way to know where you're going is invent it. And there
That was Alan Kay, by the way.
was it okay. So that's good. It seemed to me like that was somebody, more like Ben Franklin or something, but I'll take it. Alan Kay, all right, we'll put him up on the pedestal. So I'm looking at this and thinking, what Jensen started was polygons for games, right? And then that became an architecture that was really good for parallel processing to, in this world. Have you ever had him express that there is a even better than AI use for the chipsets that he's working on? I don't know. I mean,
Well,
the future.
not at the moment. I mean, if you his if you listen to his keynote, he's putting pretty much all of the focus on artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
But again, he's so smart, he's thinking way ahead of us. And I know he's got stuff in that brain that is even above what he's thinking even now, and he's building the back end architectures to make it happen.
But he's got all that enabling stuff where he's talking about not only AI the way that we're thinking about it right now, but the interoperability of the data, right? And that you're going to have smart environments, right, that are going to need this because you've got the Internet of Things sensor data, and you've got the physical, movement or robots or things that can act on, physical areas. He basically laid out an interoperability architecture, right, in his talk too.
Yeah, interoperability is going to be key, although it's very interesting because if you actually understand the vision of what he's delivering today, it really relies on something called CUDA, the software layer
Right.
he's created.
Yeah.
And the open he's locked people in to using CUDA, especially on his processors, in order to get the kind of performance they need. The competition though is going to go after CUDA with OpenAI, and
Yeah.
they're trying to create the exact open architecture to make that happen because in his sense it's CUDA's closed because it only is within the context of his architecture that can deliver the higher end stuff. And then OpenAI is trying to go after it as an open platform to compete with CUDA. That's going to be an interesting thing to see too, to see how many people back it. Right now, it's Microsoft and some of the other big players who want to play in AI across the board. But at this stage of the game, I think from NVIDIA's standpoint, they're going to be mainly focused on AI for the next 3 years.
I mean, there are companies that are sitting out there that aren't in the conversation right now that have tried to do some of the things that we're talking about, like Dassault, right? With 3DS, and they're probably not going to just sit still and say, okay, we're just going to give up all of our territory to these folks. They just haven't made their plays yet. All right, so
I had a question
Mike,
for
jump
Tim.
in.
I had a question for Tim. Tim, my history is always a little bit hazy, but was it 10 or 15 years ago? Did Jensen and NVIDIA see this and start re-architecting or designing what's now become Blackwell in reaction to some of these early developments in machine learning and AI?
Well,
Or
not
was this a case where all of a sudden somebody in NVIDIA sales noticed we got a lot of these big, our high-end graphics GPUs go into these companies we've never heard of?
well.
I was
Remember,
always curious about. I can't remember. I was
well,
how
good.
what was the twig with for him when it was like, okay, wait a minute, this
Well,
is all going in a
the
different
twig
direction.
was when and you're right to some degree, and I don't remember the timing, but it was the push to use GPUs in supercomputers. Up until that time, they were using much of the older high-end systems and just cobbling them together.
That was Google was like famous for like getting sheets of plywood or whatever, just because they could just then pull them out of the racks.
But he and actually to be fair, AMD has done quite a bit of work in the supercomputer space too, by basically and there's an immense amount of science and chemistry going on because it's not just cobbling them together. It's actually creating the interfaces, the speed integration to be able to connect the CPU, the GPU, and the APU, right? And but it was about 10 years ago where Jensen started to realize that this was going to be a very strong focus back end for artificial intelligence. And, AI historically has been, a big part of what we do in all of tech from the beginning, right? Remember I think it was in 1987, John Scully showed me, what was the Knowledge Navigator.
Knowledge Navigator, yeah.
And I don't think I put it in that. I put it in another one of my articles. But anyway, that in Knowledge Navigator, that was all AI-based stuff, even though nobody put the term AI around it.
Well, I
And
think that was kind of towards the middle of that. What I think when you look back to some of the history, like Minsky and whatnot, I think that was kind of the middle of what we now call the AI winter, right? Everyone's like, I don't know if this is ever going to work.
pretty much, I mean, there was a lot of pushback, possibly, but the majority of reasons we didn't have the processing power to do what they wanted to do. And then about 10 years ago, I was at a special event with Intel where they actually were talking about the role that supercomputers would play in drug discovery. And that was all focused on next generation processing, but also artificial intelligence. But none of us picked that up in the context of it being a massive shift. And of course, this has been, the underlying architecture for all of this has been bubbling up and going one level and another level and another level. But I think it was about 5 years ago when at one of Jensen's keynotes, where he kind of hinted about where he was going. He didn't give a declaration at that point, but you could see what they were going to do. And then once he introduced Grace Hopper, which was, the H100 series that's there now, at that point, they were able to go full in on the AI architecture. And that, of course, led to Blackwell.
Cool.
So let's open
Very
it up.
interesting. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
No.
That's your question, but we'll open up to some other folks after your thought.
I'm done.
Okay.
I only have one per morning.
Not true. All right. There's always stuff forming in your mind. I know it. So I'm since I don't have anybody off mute, I'm going to call on you. Kyle, how are you?
Hey guys, sorry I'm late.
Steve,
Was just designing AI products for the future of Storyvine. So I got caught up in selling some more NVIDIA GPUs. That's all I know is that's what you were talking about. But
oh, there you go.
no thoughts on it.
Jensen's very happy with you as a result.
Are you going to hit your numbers this quarter, Kyle? Come on.
No, horrible quarter.
So on to the topic du jour. So do you think that coding is becoming a more narrow, rarefied, profession? What would, let me put it this way. If you were advising the group of people that you were in front of at your event, was that last night? Night before last?
That's
Okay.
nice.
And you said, okay, your kids are going to go to school, going to go to college, and if they're toddlers right now, would you recommend to those parents that they get their kids into a coding school right now as they're growing up? Or what advice would you give?
Yeah, I would. I think we're shifting from a skills economy to an aptitude economy. So I would say it is almost irrelevant what skills you learn because the skills are going to be democratized. What's more important is how you integrate the outputs, basically, how you think bigger picture. So unless they've got a very, very particular kind of brain that they can only sort of focus on one thing, in that case, I would say, maybe go into like IT rather than coding per se. But anyone that can think more broadly and can think, think horizontally, I think that's going to be the most critical skill. And I think it's going to come relatively quickly, 3 to 5 years. So about the time you're in school. I mean, I honestly don't. I would search long and hard for the right program that recognizes that skills training is going to be less valuable than critical thinking and broad horizontal thinking. I would want to send them to a school that really understands what's coming and has at least one professor that thinks like that. And then I would tell my child to latch onto that professor.
So the IDEO kind of popularized the notion of the T-type personality. Broad, right, connectivity and thinking, but has a deep skill in ergonomics or engineering or something, but that you can communicate across. This seems to indicate that the downstroke starts to become less relevant.
Becomes less, or it becomes shorter, right?
Sure.
The deep
Okay,
part of
shorter.
the stroke, like you start at the bottom of the downstroke and it gets automated up from the bottom, right? So the most basic stuff gets automated really quickly. And as it gets more sophisticated, that stroke gets shorter and shorter and shorter. There's one of the guys that I used to work with has an agency now where he just fired his copywriter and his account person is now doing copywriting because that's a skill that the AI can do. And he said it wasn't about whether it was a copywriter or an account person. It was that the account person had taste and he kept her because she had taste. And I think that's a really interesting indicator that she had a general aptitude for, I can look at these outputs and know what's good or not, versus I've got a skill to be able to generate something.
Yeah. I mean, Tim, you know this, right? So I mean, some of you do, is that my dad was in charge of executive resources for a large part of IBM, right, at the end of his career, helped invent this, internal headhunting function, right? And he would go out and tell other companies that wanted to do this, what is it that the company was looking for? Judgment, right? The key skill, which is really hard to quantify. It is hard to get this onto a personality test, right? Is we're looking for good, superior judgment. And guess what? That's what you're talking about.
I think that's a huge piece of it, because the account person, when he made the change, when he fired the copy person and told the account person that was going to be her job, she absolutely freaked out. She said, "Oh my God, I can't do this. This is terrifying." And I said, "How is she today?" And he goes, "Oh, she fucking loves her job now. Like she loves it because she has judgment. These tools are just the superpower where that bottom of the T sort of came up to her level. And she can essentially just exercise her judgment with a little bit of execution."
Yeah. Tim, Mark, jump in here for a second. So, aptitude versus skills. Is this part of what you're trying to, conjure into existence? Is this part of your thesis, or is it not even adjacent? What's going on?
Oh, it's very relevant. The one of the things that I've been thinking about is how much is critical thinking an AI skill, and so we tend to differentiate. Oh, the AI does this, and the critical thinking does this. But in fact, if you were to ask and prompt an AI for any critical thinking question, it could often help you. It could often give you some very good answers. So what I see is becoming really important is imagination. And in a sense, that's taste is kind of refined imagination. You could look at it that way. And you can shape that by having having a mentor who corrects you or takes you in different directions and says, this is good, this is bad, like I did in art college, where somebody trained me to tell a fake from a real by just doing it a million times and looking for all the details. But it also, that's not even what we need anymore. We need more imagination. And so when I heard Tim talking about this, when I hear Jensen talking about this, I picture the artist of the future who can say, okay, clouds, and behind clouds is a huge program and a huge set of things that create those clouds. And the more you use words to describe the kind of clouds that you want, or water that you want, or hairstyles that you want, or anything like that, the better that gets. Music is the same thing. A building's architecture is the same thing. So all of this stuff is going to come from our ability to instantiate imagination. That's what AI helps us with. That's what prompting is. It helps us, it says, okay, you have this imagination, I can make it real behind the scenes. And that, I think, that is good for everybody, because any young person anywhere, any person anywhere who has imagination can start bringing it out in ways they never did before.
Tim, isn't that kind of baked into the name of your business, right? Creative strategies, that, the creative precedes the strategy, right? You've been at that for a while, trying to draw that out of
Well,
the organization, right?
yeah, and in all of our work, the idea was not, I would say about 70% of our work is helping companies not just be the next big thing, but differentiate themselves. And you've got to be very creative, not only in the design, but how you communicate that. And that's a really big thing. But what Mark said is I think he's really right on in that context, is that the more creative you are with the prompt, and that's where getting that information correct, it will depend on, or excuse me, will influence what actually gets done, whether it be a cloud or a clown or, whatever. And that's why it's such a revolutionary step right now. Because when the first OpenAI stuff came up, 2 years ago, the idea of speaking a word and it programming something and giving you this data was interesting. But I think the big shift was Midjourney and DALL-E and now Sora, because that's completely changing the way how people can see data and communicate data going forward.
Mm-hmm. Kyle, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so two things actually. One is one of the concepts I introduced in my talk last night was I was talking, one of the sections was how do you get AI literate when the tools are changing literally every week, right? What do you learn? And so I talked about one was just play. Just do ridiculous things, do personal things, create ridiculous prompts. So just sort of push yourself, beyond the boundaries. And then the second thing I talked about was explore your skill vacuums. And skill vacuums are, if you're a coder, make art. If you're an artist, write code. like go out of your way to play with the tools beyond what you know. And one of the things, Tim, that you're getting at with Sora and things like that, I don't know if you've played with Decohere or Krea.ai, but they're using a technology called SDXL Turbo, which is essentially instant image generation. And you can basically just draw a square and a circle in the left-hand panel, and it dynamically generates on the right-hand panel. There's no prompting needed. It's a completely visual, intuitive interface. So I think even the definition of what prompting is about to change. So by pushing into your skill vacuums, the things that you've got essentially no knowledge of, you're going to discover ways of interacting with these tools that are completely divorced from what we sort of know as prompting right now. And I think that's just going to get more and more and more fluid as we move forward.
Can you repeat the names of those platforms, tools, Kyle?
Krea.ai, Krea.ai. And go to their real-time image generation. You can also do that on Leonardo. Mm-hmm. And then Decohere is another one. Decohere, so if you go to app.decohere. Hang on. I can't ever tell if they're .io or .ai. App.deco.
You can put it in the chat when you have
no rush.
And then
Decohere.ai. And like that one's one, as you're typing your prompt, it's generating images and you have this whole sort of panel of images. And then you can take any one of those images and turn it into a video. I mean, it's just, these tools are just, they're turning into, it's kind of like work generation as video game. Is kind of where we're headed, and you know, so that facility. So I think it's critical thinking. I think it's imagination. I think you're spot on, Mark. And then I think there's something around flexibility and adaptability that becomes like that's one of the aptitudes.
So one of the things that's happening in this space that I would observe is that it's pixelating. It's like pointillism is everybody's putting a little dot on the canvas of, you know, capabilities, right? And you're going to have to be able to zoom out and say, okay, I see what's on the canvas and the picture that is emerging from all of these different capabilities, because it's going to get overwhelming, right? It is going to be the communications theorem, information overload equals pattern recognition. Okay, is that, you know, instead of the phosphor dots on the screen, I'm stepping back and, oh, look, it's television, right? Look, it's a screen. And we will need to have a way for those capabilities to become a you know, the paints next to the canvas that we can interact with. Because right now, they're discrete and they need to become part of a system, right, that we can work with. You're keeping up with it, Kyle, but the user interface is much too cumbersome to be able to really look at this as being a friendly system for bringing into existence the things that we want to make.
But
right?
that's a very short-term problem.
I know that. I know that it's moving rapidly,
Yeah.
but I just put that out there that we're doing this in, you know, invention, this, you know, imagination moment is coming in little dots, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, it's going to have to, you know, emerge into a user-friendly way to work with the capabilities as opposed to work, you know, like I have 500 subscriptions. Okay.
Yep.
That will be exhausting, right?
If you haven't seen Devon from a company called Cognition, go look at Devon. So Devon, they're calling it the world's first engineer, software engineer.
Software engineer, yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of the first autonomous agents where you give it a goal, and then it has these different modules that are all sort of glued together. It creates a project plan. It's got a command line interface that it can interact with. It's got a software development environment, and it's got a web browser. And you say, go make me this kind of software. And it'll make a plan, then it'll go find APIs that work. It'll read the documentation. It then writes the code. It runs the code. When the code breaks, it tests the code. It debugs the code, and then it lets you know when it's done.
Oh,
just go look at, hang on, just go look at the video of that and just assume that works really well in the future. And then replace software development with every other profession. And because that's where I think we go, whether it's designing or writing marketing copy or doing consulting, we will have, like, you know, you will give it a goal and then it will just go off and do all that stuff. So the fact that there's all these points out there, I think probably within this year, we'll start to see interfaces that connect all those together without us having to know them.
Here's a thought. I got a thought when we're ready.
No, go ahead, Mark.
So one way of looking at this is that everything's going to the top. Everything's going at the T, and the skills that we all need are the integrative top skills. And I'm remembering somebody who once analyzed me, this is a long story I won't go into, about saying 3 kinds of people. There's people who see the very big picture. There's people who who really are very interested in the details. And then there are people in the middle. And it was kind of like if you walked into a dinner party, some people would see the whole room, some people would see the individual cup, and some people would see something in the middle, like a place setting or whatever it is. And I'm wondering whether there's room, whether it all moves to the top and the AI or the other things do all those lower layers, or whether there's room for innovation and work at each of the levels, like making a chip or designing a chip as opposed to running the world. And therefore you can steer people, if you're steering young people or other people into the direction that's the level that's most appropriate for them. That's my wonder.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of goes back to Kyle's notion of aptitude, is that we do have different typologies of aptitudes, and it's that the tool sets are available for you to use them in the way that augments your aptitude, right? And so that's actually a good thing, right? That not replacement. I mean, that thematically, that's what I've been on for a long time. Is not, AI replacement. It's augmentation. That if you use it the right way, what's the other saw? It is that you're not going to get replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by somebody who knows how to use AI, right? So, Rob, your head is nodding up and down. We're glad to have you with us. What's coming to your mind?
I'm wondering, as you guys are talking about how long it's going to take the education system to catch up with this new type of worker that's going to be needed to do the prompt engineering, to work with these models, to do the augmentation, all those kind of skill sets that we've gotten away from over the last few decades around liberal arts educations and big picture thinking and things like that, right? To focus on more functional aspects.
I can tell you one thing that was very
That ship left a while ago.
Exactly.
and I'll ask Mac to jump into this part of the conversation too, is we had a winter intern, Vicky. Okay, so Vicky comes in and she's getting a computer science and architecture degree from one of our North Carolina universities, right? And she gets involved in some things that we wanted to do. And I said, yeah, I'll write you a letter of recommendation and all this other kind of stuff. Guess what? After just like a month and a half of contamination, by interacting with Content Evolution, she said, I think I'm kind of interested in how to apply, AI to marketing, right? And I'm interested in people, right? Kind of thing. So she spent 4 years, in a track, right, of learning, and just a little bit of exposure to real world and some of the things that we were trying to accomplish. And it's kind of like, oh, she's not probably going to get a job. She's not going to try to pursue a job directly in computer science. She's going to try to do something that uses technology to enable people to do something that they want to do, or to introduce a company's products and services to a marketplace or whatever. And it was fascinating. Mac, did you see that happen? I was watching that happen real time.
No, and how quickly she was able to pick up on it. Now, my thoughts on this, and am I mute? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Very strong.
I'm on my telephone because Zoom is not working on either of my computers at the moment. One, she picked it up very quickly, but there was someone in the background who had designed the work. And, I've been noticing what I think is a continuing schism, like Eloy and Morlocks almost, between here are the people who have to create the machines.
Mm-hmm.
And here are the people who are going to be telling the machines what to do. And those are becoming more and more distant apart.
Yep.
I can't imagine a 10-year-old waking up and saying, oh, mama, I want to be a neurolinguist.
Yeah.
But at some point, they are going to start waking up and saying, well, and for us, if we listen to this conversation, pick out all the abstractions and things like clouds. Give me a picture with clouds. Well, is it cirrus clouds, a nice spring day, or is it a tornado?
Mhm.
And people who can recognize variation in abstraction in speech will become kind of supreme
Right.
in the development of the prompts. And at the same time, excuse this please, the Morlocks will have to be in the background building the machines for the Eloys to speak to in very, very, very specific language. You know, on September the 12th, 1962, Kennedy said, "We are going to the moon." And we kind of shut down liberal arts education at that point. And it goes back to a conversation I had, I think, with one of my great aunts who had been through a very liberal arts education where a professor said, "Young lady, you will not go one step without Latin or two steps without Greek." And the idea of that has been completely lost from the 60s on, but I think we're going to be back at that. Those
What-
people, not just a broad, but a deep and broad skill set, are going to be the creators, while other people are building the palette on which they create.
Well,
And
I remember, oh, sorry, Mike.
no, and Vicky's experience was amazing in how quickly she picked up the process. Now, can you move past the process to the art that it could generate?
Yeah.
I see it differently.
Go ahead.
I see that the schism is not between the liberal arts and the technical sides of academia. I see them as all one thing. It's all sort of learning in advance, figuring things out, knowing what has to be done, knowing all the names that we've ever given to anything. Most of that stuff is nomenclature. And the other side is the imaginative side. The other side is the doing side. And so that's why I pushed so hard for real world projects, because it wasn't until Vicky got involved with a real world project at CE that suddenly she was prompted to say, oh, there may be other reasons to do other things and learn about this stuff. And the in my book, the whole academic world, the whole learning world, the whole education world that we developed over centuries to be what it is turning out to be in the new world a problem. Because no matter which side you come from, whether you come from liberal arts or you come from technology or engineering, you still have the problem of never ever having to do something that you want to do and get it accomplished. And therefore learning and finding out what your interests are in that context as opposed to an academic context.
Well, I think that's well said, Mark. And I think I was also reacting to what Mac was saying, is that period in the 60s was also, if I recall, Mac, that's when I was actually going to through
Me
grade
too.
school and it was a push my parents thought was good, but was different for them because they were both teachers, right? And one was an artist, and there's some interesting stories about engineers who took art classes from my dad. But it was that period in the early 70s when I was like getting ready to go to junior high, where all of a sudden schools weren't just saying, remember, well, some of you may remember, I had this told me when I was my parents were told when I was in third grade, it's like, Mike's shouldn't bother going to college. You should just make sure he becomes a mechanic or a carpenter. Remember, they had those counselors and those tests you would take that say, this is your track, buddy, go over here. And we've seen that kind of now extend and been augmented by, if you're not taking nothing but STEM classes and heading into these 3 or 4 professions, yeah, I guess you could get a liberal arts degree and, you'll make a certain amount of money. And what you guys are describing now is much more about what some California colleges like I went to said, hey, what do you want to do? I don't know. It's like, then you should just take some general interest class, get this for your, to get your basic prereq to get into into a 4-year school. So go explore, which was very different, right? You had these two conflicting things I saw happening to me, which was, you need to have your career picked out by the time you're 8 years old, right? And then, 4 years later, I'm being told, go take some different stuff.
But in
And
the past, the only way you could explore, Mike, was by taking classes. That's exactly right. You explored by taking classes, by doing all this learning in advance. We're in a period, and that's what Tim described so well, where you can actually start doing, where we have these tools now where you can say, oh, what I want to do is this. I imagine this in the world. I see this. I want to fix this problem. And you can actually start taking action at a very early age. That to me is the huge difference.
I agree, but there is some about technique. I just a little bit, Kyle, to this, and Mark, just slightly different. A little bit of knowledge and pretending to learn, not pretending, but learning how to paint, how brush strokes work, oil versus this material, going to make you more conversant, I think, at a higher level with the interfaces on these AI systems. Because it's one thing to say, show me a picture of a surfer on a 100-foot wave of sand. Well, because I was doing that, Kyle, with that tool you were describing earlier, and it was pretty good. I mean, it was a start.
Yeah.
Was the way you'd write. You're like, and so that's where a little bit more knowledge about technique and art. What do I mean by this type of a shadow versus this? Is going to make that process, and that's where I think, Mac, where we're getting back to is, it's going to be even more important for kids, teenagers, and college students to be a little bit more wide-ranging in the types of classes they take.
We're going to have to make your last comment. Then I'm going to turn it over to Tim for concluding comments. And if you want to go further after that, that's fine. Mac, then Tim.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't disagree with anything that's being said. I do believe that idea, and I'll quick story. Someone I worked with several years ago had trained to be a concert pianist, and she could hit the right notes every single time, but she never succeeded because she could not translate her emotions into sound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And part of the magic of this is going to be the people who are able, through their language, to translate their emotion into whatever the product is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I am interested in seeing how that happens. The other side of it is, to Mark, is how do you maximize the experiences of people, especially people in a small, limited environment, to be able to know that there is a world beyond that environment that can feed their imaginations.
Yeah.
Yes, let's talk. Let's talk, because that's what's enabled now. It used to be we were so limited geographically and in what we could do, and now we're connected with the whole world, and now anybody can hear Jason Wang's speech, and everybody can do this. So I think it's a huge world of opportunity for that new thing to happen.
And we turn it back to Tim.
Yeah, I'll end it by just saying that this conversation and this particular focus in tech right now is one of the most fascinating shifts in which the world of creativity is now married with technology in a way we've never seen it before. And I think what you guys have all contributed has been very important, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate you letting me, postulate a little bit about that concept. But I do think going forward, we need to keep an eye on this, because it really has, and I don't think this has been picked up, especially by the media yet. This has a dramatic impact on the way things are going to be done in the world of technology going forward, because we're getting the kind of processing power that's letting us do stuff we could have never done before. And it's going to force us, in a good way, I hope, to reinvent not only just programming, but how we communicate. And I think that's going to be a very big part of this.
Yeah, new product meetings are not going to be quarterly anymore. They're going to be weekly.
Yeah, pretty much.
I need 5 new products for next quarter. It's Friday. Next Friday, each of you need to have 5 new product ideas. And it's going to be like that.
Yeah.
Which will be fascinating.
Clearly our the CFOs of our world, the annual budgeting process has collapsed to quarterly, has collapsed then to monthly, and now, if you work for and work with Walmart, Walmart knows every 15 minutes how much money they have made, through satellite connectivity to all their stores. And that then triggers all of the payment algorithms for their supply chain partners, right? We made this much money. Okay, here, these are the next people. It's very sophisticated. It's very interesting, and it doesn't seem like it's that interesting a business, but it actually is fascinating when you look at manage things. So Tim, we really appreciate you being with us to share this topic, this thinking. It was a robust discussion, and we really value having you as a guest today, but as a regular
Yeah, I love
member of these calls.
I love being part of the group.
Well, we're delighted to have you with us. Well, folks, it was a good call, and we'll be back next week. With everything you do, be intentional. We'll talk in a week from now.
Okay, thank you, guys.
See ya.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.